General Electric, a household name across the globe. There isn't many companies that has such a variety of products under their belt. Everything from household appliances such as microwaves, stoves, or dishwashers to electric power generation or even aircraft components. If it has anything to do with electricity, chances are GE has its hands on it. That's no exception for the railway industry. As you know, General Electric reigns as the top dog in the field of locomotive manufacturing. Sit by a major Class 1 and wait. Whether it's one of the common ES44s, the older but still reliable Dash 9, or the newest Tier 4s, it's more than likely you'll be seeing a product of GE pulling the freight. GE entered the railroading business in the late 1800s, and several railroads have extensive histories of collaboration with the manufacturer. Unlike many of those early roads, many fallen flags linked with GE much later, as the company had to overthrow the electro-motor division as the top dog in the industry. One of those fallen flags was the Kansas City Southern. In today's video, we are going to be examining the quick shift in the relationship between it and the KCS, so let's get right into it. Starting at the beginning, there was no need for any electrical-powered locomotives back in the early days of the railroad. For starters, much of the route of the original KCS was nowhere near as developed as the metroplexes of the Northeast, where electric engines were commonly found. This was the case with the vast majority of America's railroads. Like everyone else, steam was king with primarily Baldwin-built engines, but also a few llamas hauling cargo. But as the diesel era began, KCS would receive its first diesel-powered locomotives in the form of a 1,000 horsepower switcher and streamlined E-units for passenger service in 1939. KCS was a primarily EMD road. They had everything from early model F units to the SD70 ACE. There were a few notable exceptions throughout its history, such as a handful of Baldwin locomotives and other manufacturers. I'd go into more detail, but I'll be saving these unique models for a future video. KCS would have a very bumpy journey for most of its lifespan, and that definitely did not exclude the decades leading up to Michael R. Haverty's tenure as CEO in 1995. Taking place concurrently during those years, General Electric was in the process of overthrowing EMD in the top spot. During the 1960s and 1970s, GE was growing its following within the industry thanks to the Universal Series and their successors, the Dash 7. While still being considerably outsold by EMD products such as the SD40, their lead was dwindling slowly. Still high on the success of the SD40 series, EMD would introduce the SD50 program in 1981. Unfortunately, the quality control on this series was downright abysmal from what I've read, with electrical issues being one of the most common problems. The SD50 is what many consider the beginning of the end of EMD's long reign on top. With the Dash 8 locomotives being introduced in the 1980s, followed by the Dash 9s and AC44s in the 90s, GE quickly began dominating the market. The biggest railroads were purchasing countless amounts of these locomotives, but the humble KCS would be a little late to the party. Shifting gears back towards Haverty, many praise his actions on making the KCS the appeasing railroad it would wind up as before merging with CP. Haverty modernized much of the system, played a crucial role in the formation of the Meridian Speedway intermodal traffic agreements, and doubled the railroad's size by gaining access to Mexico. And with all these upgrades would bring the need for more powerful locomotives to haul the railroad's freight. In the late 90s, KCS would finally give General Electric a shot with an order for the new AC44 CW. A total of 50 were ordered by KCS, and 75 would go to the KCS de Mexico, otherwise called TFM at the time. These units were put straight to the test right off the bat, being assigned to heavy coal drags over Rich Mountain and other duties, and they would quickly prove their worth. Initially numbered in the 2000 series, they would be renumbered into the 4500 series and partly into the 4600 series. To this day, the majority of these locomotives are still in service, with the only exceptions being units that have been scrapped from wrecks. I don't see that changing anytime soon either. We could maybe see them placed into rebuild programs down the line to extend their years of service even more. The early and mid-2000s would be the beginning of the U.S. Environmental Protective Agency cracking down on emission rates on the railroads. Tier 2 emission standards were created and had a deadline by the year 2005. GE Transportation would introduce the Evolution series to accommodate these new standards. GE would have no shortage of variations of the GEVO to please any railroad. Every single Class 1 would purchase at least one of these different models. KCS would initially purchase the most common model of the Evolutions, the ES44AC. Between both KCS and KCSM, a total of 270 ES44s were purchased. The first batch of these arrived in 2007 and would be among some of the first locomotives to receive the vibrant retro bell paint scheme that was set to replace the Battleship Gray. In the entire 136 years of operation, the ES44AC would be the most purchased locomotive by the KCS. These locomotives would be numbered from 4680 to 4919. KCSM would actually receive one of the last batches of Tier 3 GEVOs produced in 2019, which would be accompanying the 25 locomotives that we will be covering next. In early 2019, along with the 25 Tier 3 GEVOs sent to KCSM, KCS would also be purchasing 25 ET44ACs. More EPA standards would be rolled out, and with that came the need for Tier 4 emission locomotives. Beginning in 2012, GE would introduce the Tier 4 compliant locomotives, with Union Pacific and other Class 1s quickly placing orders for the ET44AC. While very similar to their Tier 3s in appearance, the larger radiators on the rear is a definitive way to identify these locomotives. KCS would order their 25 Tier 4s in the 5000 series from number 5000 to number 5024. Not only would these be the most modern locomotives, but also the very last new locomotives that the KCS would ever purchase. And that wraps up this overview of the relationship between the KCS and General Electric. Although never purchasing Tier 4s, Canadian Pacific has had an extensive roster of General Electric locomotives, which includes rebuild models. I see no change of GE's involvement with the newly formed CPKC. While no one is currently ordering new locomotives, GE rebuilds are a common sight in the industry these days. KCS bought several second-hand Dash 9s from BNSF back in 2021, and they've mostly sat in storage lines. It's my guess that these will eventually be sent through a rebuild program, but we'll just have to wait and see. I hope you enjoyed this video, and like I mentioned earlier, I do plan on making a video on some of the oddball locomotives KCS had back in the earlier years of diesels. But until the next one, thanks for watching y'all, and I'll be seeing y'all somewhere out there on the rails.